Hi, I'm Joe Sawyer, the Superintendent of the Shrewsbury Public Schools, and welcome to another episode of Superintendent's Update. Today my guests are Meg Belsito, who's our Assistant Superintendent for Student Services, Amy Clouter, who's our Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction and Assessment, and Jane Lizotte, who is the Principal at Sherwood Middle School. The three of them are providing some leadership right now for our district around the topic of social and emotional learning. We thought it was a good idea to share some information with the community regarding the work that we are doing, which was in response to the feedback we received when we created our most recent strategic plan. When we put together the newest strategic priorities that were adopted about a year ago, the feedback from the community was very strong that it was, in addition to the kind of academic skills students need to achieve, there's a lot of different skills that people might call life skills, various ways that people become successful in their lives. And there's actually a part of education that is very much in the forefront right now, known as social and emotional learning. And what we did was we established a goal, a strategic goal, under the idea of something that we're calling a priority of enhanced well-being of all. That talks about creating a common understanding of the benefits of these skills, these habits, these mindsets of social and emotional learning, and that we want to work as a school district to develop a shared systematic approach to explicitly teach, integrate, and assess these competencies. So we've undertaken that work. We have a district-wide steering committee that's broken into 3 subcommittees that each of you is leading. There are school-based subcommittees on social and emotional learning. We're spending time this year inventorying lots of practices that we're already undertaking as a school district and have been for a number of years in different ways, with the intent that by next December we'll create a very comprehensive plan about how we can best integrate and move these forward and achieve this goal. So that's the work that's happening, but I was hopeful that we could talk a little bit to help people understand what exactly is social and emotional learning, how is social and emotional learning defined. There's a framework that we indicated we would adopt by this year, which we've done. So maybe starting with Amy, if you could talk a little bit about what framework we've adopted and what that definition is that we're working off of.
Sure, we've adopted the CASEL framework, which is widely known as the CASEL wheel. And the definition that CASEL uses for social emotional learning is the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions.
And so all these are things that, if anyone thinks back to their own education or school, these were all things that were somewhat implicit in what people were expecting good behavior from students, expecting to develop kinds of attributes that are going to lead you towards success. But maybe, Meg, can you talk a little bit about some of these, what they call core competencies that make up the CASEL model? And they have some simple definitions, but I think they're very important areas that we want our students to develop.
Absolutely. So when you look at the CASEL wheel, there are 5 competencies, one being self-awareness. So a student should know their strengths, limitations with a grounded sense of confidence, optimism, and a growth mindset. There's also self-management, where effectively students should manage stress, control impulses, motivate themselves to set and achieve goals. Also looking at social awareness to understand the perspective of others and empathize with them, including those from diverse backgrounds and cultures. Relationship skills, students should be able to communicate clearly, listen well, cooperate with others, resist inappropriate social pressure, negotiate conflict constructively, and seek and offer help when needed. And lastly, responsible decision making, when students should make constructive choices about personal behavior and social interactions based on ethical standards, safety, and social norms.
So again, these are all things that if you ask any parent, you ask any teacher what we want for our kids, these are things that we want them to develop. Mm-hmm. And one thing I like about the model that the district's adopting, this wheel, is that in addition to those competencies, there are these outer rings in terms of showing kind of how we're developing these. Maybe, Jane, you could talk a little bit to those different layers of support.
Sure. The rings really describe how we teach these skills in our classrooms, in our schools, in our home and communities. So when we look at social emotional learning and we think of our individual classrooms, we think of what is being taught and modeled and reinforced in the classroom as that relates to curriculum and instruction. When we look at our school communities, we think about what school-wide practices and policies are actively in place, and how is it that we engage entire school communities in that work by setting expectations, modeling those expectations, sharing and reinforcing those messages verbally and visually across our schools, so that students and staff and families are clear about what those practices and policies include. And then as we look to our homes and communities, we, at a school-based level and at a district level, we communicate with families and communities what it is that we're doing, why we believe this area is so important to students and adults' lifelong learning. And we communicate through weekly updates. We communicate by way of bringing in speakers so that we are educating our families and our communities. We invite people into our schools so that they can inform and educate our students about what it is they do in their personal and professional lives, and how these social emotional skills are integral to a student's learning and lifelong, again, health and well-being and happiness.
So one thing I like about this model is that it really signals that there's an integration between responsibility in the schools and responsibility at home. And I think sometimes people create this false dichotomy of, well, certain skills should be taught in the home and the school should be reserved for academic kinds of skills, or maybe the other way around, where people perceive, well, the school should be teaching everything and anything, and it's really a partnership between the home and the school to be able to try to provide the kinds of, build on these competencies we want students to develop. But one thing, and I think people would be curious about, and Amy, if you could respond to this in terms of some of these pieces. Some of them happen by modeling and whatnot, but these are skills and things that can be explicitly taught. And what are some of the ways that we have been and would be looking at how to teach these things within the curriculum and when students are within their school experience?
Absolutely. I think it's really important to acknowledge that we are doing some of this important work. At the elementary level, for example, I think educators and families alike will be familiar with the focus for this first 6 weeks of school on getting to know each other, using morning meeting routines to kind of build a classroom community, and setting rules and expectations throughout the school for general student behavior. Taking time to think about that in a developmental way for each grade span is part of really strong SEL practice. Beyond that, within the curriculum itself, there are opportunities. So in the social studies curriculum, when you're looking at world civilizations and you're looking at the contributions of different cultures, that's a way to get perspectives and have kids understand the contributions of people who are different from them. When you're looking at the new science practices, for example, one of the practices calls for students being able to engage in an argument with evidence. As you well know, we don't want kids to be arguing, in a way that's counterproductive to learning. So being able to understand and empathize is part of drawing on those relationship skills around, why might this be important to me? How is it important in a general sense beyond me? And how can I, support my thinking with some reasoning? And I think at every level, teachers prompt students to think about setting reasonable goals and to make good decisions. As students get older, that becomes more important because the decisions they make have bigger consequences. So there's an overlap between some of the social emotional curriculum and the academic curriculum. But there are also some explicit skills that kids don't have. And part of the work of the district committee is thinking about what's needed next in order to help teach those things in a more structured way and a consistent way. And thinking about how those skills grow across the grade levels.
Thank you. It's integrated in different ways already, but I think becoming even more explicit is going to be important. That's exciting work that we have ahead of us to figure out ways we can do that at the different age levels as students move through. So there are things that all of our kids get in terms of the kind of culture we're trying to build and the things we're teaching, but there are times when students are maybe having difficulties with their social or emotional or behavioral situation, and I'm wondering, Meg, if you could talk a little bit about what we do in terms of providing support or providing interventions for students who might be struggling with social and emotional issues.
So our schools have been working on implementing a multi-tiered system of support to meet students' academic and behavioral needs. In a tiered approach, the educators provide high-quality SEL instruction and practices for all students to help develop those core competencies that we just mentioned earlier. Educators support staff, also use data to inform when additional efforts are needed, and provide supplemental supports based on individual students' social emotional needs. And then additionally, if there are more intensive supports that are provided individually for students that may have more urgent or intensive needs, we would look at that on an individual basis if a child's having that level of difficulty. So tier 1, SEL will generally occur in like a whole school, whole class setting, while tier 2 and tier 3 supports may be provided through targeted group instruction, embedded within a classroom setting, individual work with students, in counseling sessions, or in other settings as appropriate.
So in terms of, as people in the community or parents think about positions like school psychologists, adjustment counselors at the middle school level, might be people you'd think of who are doing more intensive interventions, but I think one of the things we're looking at is finding ways that other educators or even the classroom teacher might be providing other kinds of interventions, that we don't want this big gap between the sort of basic instruction everybody gets and expectations and someone having really intensive issues. There's that place in between, and that'd be more of that tier 2 kinds of things. And that's something I think we through this work we'll be doing over the coming months, looking at ways we can provide more robust opportunities for those kinds of interventions.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Great. So in terms of, when we talk about things that all kids experience, every school district has a culture and a climate, and the more it's critically important that culture and climate is a positive one and a purposeful one that is helping students develop, and it makes a huge difference in terms of quality. And Jane, can you talk a little bit about your perspective on culture and climate in schools and classrooms, and what works towards promoting effective social and emotional learning?
Sure. When I think of social emotional learning and culture, I think of Ted Sizer, who's the founder of the Coalition for Essential Schools, who once said, "You cannot teach a student you do not know." And I firmly believe that. And in our schools, there are several ways we get to know our students better on an academic level and on a personal level. And those include greeting students as they enter our building and our classrooms in the morning. That means saying goodbye at the end of the day. It's checking in with students in formal and informal ways. At the middle level and at the elementary level, we meet with students every day in a morning meeting or responsive advisory meeting where the class is sitting together either on the floor or in groups, and they're greeting one another, they're sharing news and information. Some of that is curriculum related, some of it is not. They may play a game or an activity as they get to know one another at a different level and better. Adults in the community, it's equally as important for adults to feel as though they're welcomed and they're valued as we welcome and value the students. So we do several things with staff during professional development opportunities and again throughout the course of the day so that staff feel welcome and included and happy. We know that strong school cultures begin with connections, those strong and overlapping interactions that people have with all members of the school community. And so our teachers really, and educators, paraprofessionals, do a number of things to, again, deepen their relationships with students, and that's working one-on-one in small groups and larger group settings. We know that strong school cultures are strong because of those interactions, and we know that those cultures are shaped by beliefs and values, shared values. We know that they are shaped by the actions of the members of the community. And when I say community in our schools, it's everyone. It's our children, our teachers, our paras, our counselors, our parents, our community partners, who, as I mentioned earlier, are an integral part of our programming. So our school mission statement begins with "in partnership with the community," and strong school cultures begin with strong communities.
And so, how people treat each other within the school, and I think sending those messages. I know that in one of the definitions it talked about a growth mindset, and maybe if we talk for a little bit about, because it's a buzzword certainly in education, it's even out in the business world the last few years, but in terms of a growth mindset, what we want to instill in our students, maybe we could talk a little bit and help people understand when we talk about that kind of mindset, what we mean. And so everyone wants to jump in and give a little bit of a context for that, for people who might not be familiar with that term.
I think it begins from a teacher's level, thinking about, as they're planning for students, having a culture of high expectations in the classroom and sending messages of, this is really important work, we're in it together, I'm not going to give up on you, everybody here is a contributor. And then I think it also goes to showing students and providing opportunities for them to understand that learning is a continuum and everybody is going to improve. Not everybody starts in the same place, but also making it okay for people to be honest about where they are and to make that part of their goal setting so that kids experience that the joy that comes from reaching a small goal and then feel the momentum of setting another goal as they move forward. And I think that happens on the academic side really naturally, and I think we need to start thinking about how we do that from the social emotional side. And I know you can speak to that really well, Jane.
Oh, well, thank you, Amy. In our classrooms, we speak often about changing our mindset and being very specific with language that we may use as children and adults. So I might be struggling in a math class with a math problem, and I say, I can't do this. And the teacher or another student, you will overhear them saying, you can't do this yet. You will be able to do it with time, effort, and opportunity. And I think our educators and our faculty members do a wonderful job sharing examples from their own lives. I never thought I could run a 5K, but I can, and it took time, and this is what I did to get there. So, it's sharing those life examples, and it's also really sticking with it and celebrating those times when students do get stuck and when it does get messy, because we know that those are our greatest opportunities for growth and learning. Those opportunities also teach each of us how to be more resilient and how great it feels when we have developed that resiliency. And so the growth mindset is really just that. It's changing the mindset of how we think or feel in a particular moment and giving students the power and the opportunity and resources to grow and develop with this is important, you can do it, I will not give up on you.
Yeah,
message.
Both of those things, the power of yet with growth mindset, I think speaks to all learners. So when I think of it, I think of a student that might not be able to speak yet, so might be nonverbal. So they might not be able to yet. So they might be using an iPad to help communicate, and eventually through therapy or services or being around their peers, they might then begin to say a few words, and that is a success, and that is, okay, I can do this, I can. Or the student that started with us in preschool that wasn't yet walking, and now you see them in elementary school and they are. So those, to have that kind of growth mindset and live those successes in our schools is just, it's awesome to see.
No, that's absolutely true, and I think that regardless of students who have a major challenge or not so much, but still, there is a lot. I think one of the most important ways in which we've been developing this is to get away from what unfortunately can easily become the case, which is students starting to believe that if they're struggling with something, it must be because they just don't have the innate talent to do it. I'm not good at math or whatever it might be, or they perceive that if they do well or don't do well, it's just attributable to luck, or that it's just, well, it was a hard test or it was an easy test. And the research that Carol Dweck did and around most of the research around this growth mindset that's been very powerful is that if there's effective effort and opportunity, students have that, they can grow, and those are the students who ultimately do the best. It says, because those who think it's all just innate, if they come up to that point where they are challenged, that resilience usually isn't there, whereas those who are used to saying, okay, well, if it didn't happen, I can work harder or I can do something differently to get there. But I think the key point is that, and this is all tied together with academics as well as social and emotional pieces, but finding ways to help kids develop these kinds of mindsets around these different competencies that we're trying to teach and move forward is important. So one of the pieces, we didn't start the show this way, but there's some leadership mantra out there that you should always start with why. But again, we developed this because there was lots of feedback from the community, from parents, from community members, staff, students, and we put this plan together for our next 5 years, what to focus on. These kinds of competencies were things people wanted us to focus time and attention on. And I'm curious if each of you could just share what's something that you really believe is really important about this work around social and emotional learning that we need to be doing, and why this is so important for our school district.
Well, you will, if you Google social emotional learning, you will see an expression repeated throughout articles and stories and whatnot, that social emotional learning is the plate. It's not something that we have added to our plates as educators and as good human beings. And I firmly believe that if we do not, or do not to the degree we feel we need to, teach students and model for students and reinforce these very important skills to which Meg referred earlier, students are going to be either unable to or not to the best of their ability access curriculum, the academics, in the ways we want them to. And that's in meaningful ways, in joyful ways. We know as adults, if we do not feel welcomed and accepted and valued in a community or in a meeting or in a group, that we don't do our best work. It just doesn't happen. So we need to spend time, thought, opportunity throughout the course of our children's days in every one of our schools, consistently working on these skills, these life skills, these essential skills, in order for them to be able to grow and again learn and be good, compassionate human beings.
Mm-hmm.
I would echo that. I think, when you ask people to recall their favorite schooling experience, very few people speak to what they learned academically in a vacuum. They think about a teacher who made them feel powerful, or a teacher that really built a relationship with them so that they felt that they got smarter that year. And I think schools, as kind of small versions of the world out there, have to respond to some of the demands that kids bring to school with them. And we know as adults we struggle with the huge proliferation of choices. And how do you make sense of all the options that you now have? We struggle with balancing work and life. We struggle with making decisions and social media. And I think those things are happening for students as well. And so if the purpose of school is to prepare kids to be successful, competent adults that contribute to the community, we need to help set the stage for doing some of that work when they're younger and the stakes are lower.
When I think about the why over the last couple of years, in my time in Shrewsbury so far, and conversations and observations and looking at data through surveys and in different forums that have been held, I think a lot about how we need to promote and improve students' attitudes and beliefs about themselves, about their relationships with others, and about their education. And I think that this work will only help us to move the district forward in a trajectory to make sure that our students, through the work with the profile of the graduate and the strategic priorities, that will help improve all of the things that Amy and Jane just mentioned. And I believe that it's work well worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. Well, it gets to the heart of why we do this work, and I think it was interesting. We had already embarked upon this work, but just in early 2019, a national report was released from the National Commission on Social, Emotional, and Academic Development, which I think is getting a lot of traction in the media. It's titled "From a Nation at Risk to a Nation at Hope." And similar to the analogy about the plate, they're talking about this is not something that's extra or an add-on. And one quote from the report, it says, "The promotion of social, emotional, and academic learning is not a shifting educational fad. It is the substance of education itself." It is not a distraction from the real work, quote unquote, of math and English instruction. It is how instruction can succeed. And so an education that only provides for students' academic learning is not going to be sufficient. And for all the reasons you all articulately stated, this is really important for us to do. And this is to take students who are doing well and help them do even better and develop the kinds of things that will make a difference, let them apply all the things they're learning and become successful in their higher education and the workplace beyond that and in life generally as part of a community. But we also do have some concerning data that says levels of anxiety, levels of depression, things that are concerning relative to students' mental and social and emotional health. We're seeing behaviors at times that are concerning within our schools among students. And this is something that is just critically important for us, I believe. I think the community is asking for it. I think educators are asking for it. And I think that this can be a pathway to really strengthen the approach we're taking, the cultures and the climates in our schools, the kinds of ways that teachers and educators and support staff interact with students. But as you all just said, so students themselves gain that confidence and resilience and all these different competencies, because when you read these definitions, you say that's what I would want. That's what any parent would want for their child. It's what any community should want for its children. And I'm excited that Shrewsbury is really moving down a path that is going to help our students really develop these kinds of competencies and in a way that's going to help them become better people. And that's ultimately why we do this work and is the mission of our school district. So I thank you for your input and your perspectives. We'll continue to communicate around this as we work through. We're making reports to the school committee, and we'll be coming up with a more comprehensive plan by next December that will really guide our work over the next several years. So with that, I thank you everyone for watching this episode of Superintendent's Update. We appreciate your support, and thank you. And please tune in, and we'll be looking at this topic again in future episodes. So thank you.